Welcome to the Moss Report with your host, Dr. Ralph W. Moss.
So this is Ralph Moss with the Moss Report. And today we have a very special guest. I'm interviewing Dr. Raymond Chang, MD, who is a longtime physician treating cancer in New York City at Meridian Medical. And Dr. Chang received his BA, magna cum laude, and MD degrees from Brown University, and then did his postdoctoral training at Yale, Waterbury, and Cornell, New York hospitals, where he was elected a fellow of the American College of Physicians in 1995. He is trained in both Western medicine, obviously, and also in traditional Eastern medicine, and he's pioneered the approach of integrative approach of combining those two things into a single whole. He began his cancer career at my old alma mater, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, a little later than I was there, in 1987, and he was associated with MSKCC until 1997. He also served on the faculty of the Weill Cornell School of Medicine and was an attending physician at New York Presbyterian Hospital. So welcome to the program.
It's such a pleasure, Ralph. Yeah.
It's great to talk to you again. Glad to see that everything is going well for you. I guess where I'd like to begin is that you wrote a fantastic book about 10 years ago called Beyond the Magic Bullet. I've recommended that book. I continue to recommend that book to everybody listening, to all of my phone consultees and my readers. I think it was so far ahead of its time that it didn't get quite as much attention as it deserved. But the basic premise of the book, and I had a chance to reread it very recently, was that we were coming off the era of HIV, not that we're still not dealing with HIV/AIDS, but you know what I mean, the transition from AIDS being a death sentence in that terrible time in New York when you and I both were living and working there, to almost a very rapid, I don't want to say overnight, but a very rapid turnaround of that disease and the fate of people with that disease. And it came about, most people don't realize this, that they took basically three relatively ineffective or not very effective drugs, and by putting them together in a cocktail, they took three, I'll call them ineffective drugs, and turned it into one fantastic treatment. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit and how that inspired your cancer philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the day. I actually remember the day when the trials, they were trialing AZT as a treatment for HIV as a single versus a cocktail. And I remember getting on my beeper that day that they announced to immediately terminate the trial and to immediately move everybody on the single agent to the cocktail, because it was no longer ethical to continue the trial, being that everybody on the cocktail was doing so well and not so much the people on the single treatment. Of course, this whole idea started out in a test tube experiment showing that if you combine multiple antivirals that targeted different aspects of the HIV virus, experiments done by Dr. David Ho, that essentially can much better suppress the disease than the virus. Of course, this idea of combining multiple ingredients into one single treatment is the bedrock of traditional Asian medicine, Chinese medicine. There's almost hardly a Chinese medical herbal formula that consists of only one herb.
Right.
But even if you use one herb, of course, no single herb has a single ingredient. Every herb has multiple ingredients in it.
Yes.
So this idea of multiplex, multi-pronged kind of cocktail approach is quite natural to an Eastern medical approach. That you target different aspects, and then also the side effects cancel each other out, ideally, and then there's synergism between the different approaches.
Yes.
We have a singular system. It's monolithic and it's linear. It has cultural roots, and it works for most common conditions. If you have a sore throat, if you have a headache, you can try Tylenol. If it doesn't work, you can then take some aspirin. I mean, if you have high blood pressure, it works to do one drug at a time for most of these common things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of drilled into doctors when they're in training to just try A doesn't work, then try B.
Mm-hmm.
But these conditions are different in that, number one, they're not life-threatening. You have time. I mean, it's okay if your blood pressure remains slightly high for a month or two before the next follow-up. And number two, the treatments work very well. I mean, penicillin still works extremely well for strep throat. So if it's sore throat, if it's strep, try penicillin. Chances are you won't need to go back to see your doctor again, and fine. And you're not going to die from your strep throat. And so even if it doesn't work after a few days, and the cultures come back, etc., the doctor can switch you and you'll still be fine. Cancer is a different animal. Ralph, you know this very well. Number one, most of the treatments for the major cancers still don't work as well as we wish. So the treatments don't work very well. Plus, the big concern is there is no time. We cannot afford, in somebody with advanced cancer, 2-3 months to figure out if the treatment works. Frequently, when the doctors put somebody on a treatment, chemo or currently immunotherapies, checkpoint therapies, they cannot tell you that it's going to work. And it's never anywhere close to 70, 80, 90%. It's more like 20, 30% at an advanced stage or even less. So basically, the patient is then put at risk of most likely the treatment not working, and then they lose time because it takes three months on average for the next scan, the next checkup to figure out if the treatment has done anything. So you lose time on a treatment that is not likely to work. In which case, I would therefore submit that a better approach is to throw things in tandem or in combination or in cocktail fashion at the disease, and therefore we don't waste time. You combine 3 treatments. If each one targets a different mechanism, and then you have, say, even 20% for each one, you get, even arithmetically, you get 60%, but if they're synergistic, you can get even more. Mm-hmm. So that is the idea, but there are so many reasons why mainstream folks don't want to or cannot pursue this.
Well, what are some of them?
The most common reason is the doctors would come and say, well, number one, of course, it's not protocol. And number two is frequently you hear this, well, if it works, we don't know what worked and what did it, so it's messy. Okay, but this is coming from more a researcher's point of view or a pharmaceutical company's point of view or the FDA's point of view. The FDA, of course, needs to know what works in a trial. You can't put 5 things in and say we don't know what's doing what. I mean, that's bad. Mm-hmm. And they argue it is valid argument from their perspective, but if you are the patient, even if the doctor himself was the patient, I always say, if you look at it from the patient's point of view, does the patient care what works? If it works,
right.
The parallel would be if you got 5 lottery, you got a bunch of lottery tickets and you are the winner. Do you still go back and check what the numbers are? Does it matter? You won it.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't matter to the patient. They don't care. They just want to be cured or to have a better result.
Or
But everybody else
they might know
cares.
what did it, but they might not know how it did it. So take it to another level.
Yeah, and maybe A plus B did it, and maybe just
Right.
A, maybe B, or maybe C, but But actually, that is the problem of traditional Chinese medicine, that it's not so scientific because you can't figure out because there's too many things in there. You don't know which herb and what's the ingredient inside, in which meat. It's hard to sort everything out. It's messy. It's almost like Chinese food. It's chop suey. It's messy. So seriously, that is part of the problem. And then there are other reasons that the patients are unaware. One being, if you're the insurance company, would you like to cover 5 things at one time for a single person? You don't want to do that for simple business reasons, because cancer drugs are expensive.
Yeah.
Multiply that by 5 in the same duration of time, it's not going to work out. So they will try every possible way to deny that this is actually what happens. Well, has the patient tried, if you propose 2 things, or has the patient already failed the previous one? If not, they cannot go to the next one. The next one usually more expensive, more recently approved, and the newer agents. They say, have you tried all the old ones first? That's a standard response, and that's actually what happens. We then have to fill out a form, submit it for pre-approval, and one of the questions is, has the patient tried A, B, and C? If you haven't, they wouldn't let you add other things on because they don't want to pay for it. It's simple as that. It's basic capitalism is what.
Yeah. Even if you know that new treatment is better than the old treatment, but they keep on giving the old treatment, and it's very hard to break through, which we've seen with the immune checkpoint inhibitors. That even though you know that this is going to be more effective in some situations, but they still insist that the patient go through the chemo when they know that
because it's much more expensive. Yeah, the newer the treatment, the more expensive it is. So they want you to try something cheap first.
Right.
And your survival, the patient's survival, is not the priority with the insurance company. So, but patients are unaware. They don't imagine that the insurance company has a hand in this, which they do.
Of course.
When doctors see patients, the diagnosis is already known before the consultation. It's already inputted online to the insurance company, and the insurance company frequently faxes a list of things they would cover for this under this diagnosis code. So the doctor has a list of it in front of him. He already, before the first consultation, he already knows what he'll be, what's covered and what's not. And guess what? Many insurances, including Medicare, you signed a contract with the insurance company that you are not allowed to bill the patient, which means you can only do what the insurance allows you to do, otherwise you won't get paid. So imagine that. So how are you going to propose 3 things? You're not going to propose 3 things. You won't be getting any payment on the rest of the 2.
Right.
So you won't offer it. But again, the patient doesn't realize all this behind the scenes, the infrastructure, if you will, behind this. They just think the doctor's telling them to do treatment A, that must be the best treatment for them, not realizing that there are many other reasons why they're offered treatment A.
And the other thing is the homogenization of treatment with the NCCN, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, that basically they got the entire world to follow their recommendations, coming from Sloan Kettering, originally Sloan Kettering and MD Anderson and Dana-Farber, but now encompassing about 20 different academic centers in the United States. I just tell you a little anecdote. I visited China twice, and the first time I went, there were some clinics, doing all kinds of interesting, unusual things. The second time I went back about 5 years later, everybody's following the NCCN guidelines that I visited in China.
Exactly.
So it spread all over the world, and and patients say, "Well, I'm thinking I got my diagnosis at Sloan Kettering, let's say, and I'm thinking though of going to MD Anderson and getting a second opinion, and I have to keep myself."
They'll tell them exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same. It's been completely homogenized, which is in one sense was good because occasionally you'd see a patient who got some crazy, wrong, quote unquote, oddball recommendation, but it also, that wasn't so common. But what it did was it eliminated all individual initiative on the part of the doctors. Right. And it must be a hard thing to see that.
That's what I call cafeteria medicine. That medicine has become cafeteriaized. For the sake, I mean, I understand if you serve a lot, if you have to prepare 1,000 lunches every day, you know, you can't have everybody ordering, you know, I want my meat medium rare, I want this, I want that. Yeah. It's easy. Everybody with this gets A. And if A fails, then everybody moves to B. So it's a factory production. It's very efficient for delivery purpose and for billing purpose. Everything's standardized.
Yeah, but that's not why you went into medicine.
No, yeah, but and again, you know, the doctors become robots. I have seen, Ralph, I don't know if you saw this, I have seen the prototype of a robotic oncologist. No. It's amazing. You sit in front of the screen.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, you sit in front of the screen, it will tell you, and you talk to the screen, and of course this is wonderful during COVID because you don't need to see the doctor, you just talk to the screen. The screen, you know, you press 1, press 2. So basically, it will tell you, you know, based on your pathology, you have non-small cell lung cancer, stage 3C, so the recommended treatment according to the NCCN guidelines is, you know, this, is, you know, whatever, carbotaxol, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the treatment's going to go on for X number of times, you get it every 3 weeks, etc. So press 1 to get a printout of all the toxicities. Press 2 if you want to speak to the nurse practitioner. Press 3 if you want, when you're ready to schedule your treatment appointment. End of story.
Yes.
And that's how it is. And then of course, the robotic oncologist will not be sued, and everything. You know, all the it's very well integrated. Can be integrated with the insurance. Everything will be covered. I mean, the whole thing works beautifully.
Yes, except
it's robotic,
and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work.
And you'll get the expected results. I mean, you know, whatever the statistical, you know, everybody will fall in line with the statistics.
Right.
And because, you know, that's where it comes from. But unfortunately, we're heading that way because then you only need to hire nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And then the doctors will be just programming this robot and just, you know, playing with the software a little bit, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's the future of medicine.
Right. And yet, you know, with all of that, a good 40%, I would say, of the cancer patients wind up in a incurable stage 4 condition, and they'd have very, very little to offer those patients because with a rare exceptions.
Exactly. Well, they will be shepherded into clinical trials.
Right. Right, which almost never work for the actual person.
Especially the phase patient. 1.
Phase 1 and phase 3, you're going to be randomized to not get the thing you want. So this is, as I say, knowing you, I doubt if this is why, when you were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young person at Brown University, I'm sure you weren't dreaming of a future whether you'd be replaced by a robot. I mean, that's kind of nuts, right? So what you know, you were at Memorial Sloan Kettering for 10 years, and I'm wondering what made you leave, and must have been a turning point for you that made you then go into private practice with a different approach, a complementary approach?
It's interesting. You don't, you know, if you are an employee and you practice it, you kind of swim in the pool, and that's how you're taught to do everything and just follow you actually, I was never aware of all this, you know, insurance, all this kind of thing. We just, you know, it's routine. It's like breathing air. It's no question. That's the way things are, and it was very, the position's very comfortable, et cetera, and Sloan's very comfortable.
Yes.
Except increasingly, I began to feel that maybe there are some other things. I remember at the time, I saw there's a not a real patient. I mean, he himself is a Nobel laureate from across the street at Rockefeller who had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And we just chatted, or we encountered each other, so to speak, and then we chatted. And then we talked about traditional Chinese medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, for your situation, I mean, there's some research on these couple of herbs.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a notepad there, so I had my prescription pad, which has Sloan Kettering on the pad. So I just wrote down. It's not a formal prescription; it's an herb. I just wrote the name on the piece of paper, the prescription pad. I gave it to him because he's a Nobel, he's a Nobel laureate. He's a researcher himself. I said, well, why don't you look into this?
Mm-hmm.
And within, again, all these people are no longer here, so I can speak freely, I presume. And then, not so many days later, I got a call from Paul Mark's office. Mm-hmm. Dr. Mark was the president. Yeah.
Right.
Is this Dr. Chang? I hear you are prescribing Chinese herbs. So I had to go and explain. I said, I didn't prescribe anything. You cannot prescribe Chinese herbs using a New York State prescription. I just wrote it because it's a piece of paper on my thing, on my desk, and he is a researcher. And I just gave him an idea. We were discussing this academically. Yes. I'm not prescribing traditional Chinese medicine, et cetera, et cetera. Then I realized, really, I mean, if this is such a, big deal. I mean, it really shook me. I have to be called in, somewhat slapped on the back to say that I'm prescribing
it's like the
Chinese medicine on New York State prescription.
The principal called you in.
That what are you doing? You're kind of you're going outside of the party line. I mean,
yes.
We would like to take a moment to thank our Patreon subscribers for helping to make this program possible. If you would like to have access to exclusive content, including transcriptions, episode recaps, and special offers, become a patron today at patreon.com/mossreports.
But I was also involved with, at the time, there was beginning an interest in alternative medicine. So I got involved with a course with Dr. Woody Merrill, who's still in practice, good friend. And he started teaching alternative medicine as an elective over at Columbia.
Right.
I did the same thing at Cornell, offering the medical students a brief elective for those who are interested. And we're one of the first medical schools in America to offer.
Yes.
So I was doing some other things, which then everything became slightly uncomfortable. There were other doctors at Sloan that were very supportive. Sid Winor, you remember him?
I remember him very well. He was the chairman
wonderful gentleman. Yeah.
Chairman of gastroenterology, right?
Exactly, and Mrs. Winor had cancer, and so. Right. And we had a lot of discussion. He was very supportive, and at the time, also Mr. Lawrence Rockefeller was very supportive of going into this direction.
Right.
So at some point, I was offered, and with some backing from Mr. Rockefeller, to kind of start a program at Sloan. Yeah. But I felt that eventually, Barry Cassavett came in and kind of did all that at Sloan. But I felt that I would still be under their, it would still be under their guidance. I mean, so to speak. So I really can't be too, let's say, creative.
Yes, right.
So, then at which point I said, well, if I really want to do this, I need to do it outside of, So, but I kept my appointment at Cornell and switched over across the street to New York Hospital. And then I went to private practice and to do what I, want to do.
Yes.
And with the support of a lot of my colleagues, and they say, Ray, don't worry, we'll send you patients, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So with everybody's support and your support, et cetera. So and I have been very happy. Yeah. So
good, and it's been 20 coming up on 24 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so you, I think one of the things that's distinctive about your approach is the use of these less toxic repurposed drugs, and also nutritional factors, herbal medicine. So what do you see with some of these repurposed drugs? There's a lot of talk about this now.
Yeah. So especially over. It's interesting. I kind of got squeezed into that, which is fine. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful in a way. Mm-hmm. But part of my agreement, not necessarily on paper, but the tacit agreement, is that if I were to practice and treat cancer within a certain radius of Sloan, that I should, this is just recommended by some of my colleagues there. Mm-hmm. They said, well, we can't refer to you if you're going to do exactly what we do. Yeah, it will be a conflict of interest. Yeah. But if you do what we don't do and we can't do, then we can refer to you. Right. So then I kind of built an interest in what can I do that is not that's outside of so it started that way. But then it's over a decade ago. But that time we called it off-label medicine. Mm-hmm. That there are certain drugs that have anti-cancer efficacy, but it's underrepresented mainly because of lack of commercial value. Mm-hmm. There are no trials, there are no further studies, and certainly no marketing of these medicines, and they're not in the protocols. So I began to talk about some of them, et cetera, and then name change, become repurposed. Yeah. And then it has grown, that field has grown tremendously. Tremendously, right. In the past, and tremendously. And there are now, so many different categories. But we still face the same problem. I mean, the common things, like metformin has grown tremendously. Number of studies, number of trials in other countries mostly have grown tremendously, and the data has accumulated tremendously. Right. But we still face the same issues that, it's lesser known, it's not standard, mainly because there is no commercial value. Well, what you see, the tip, if I could break in here for a second, that you see the pattern is the same. It's what my friend Wayne Jonas calls, they reach the valley of death, meaning that the drug is researched in a laboratory and does very well. And it can be put into a few patients, and you see some articles about just a case history or maybe a small case series. And then that people say, well, this is so good, we have to put this through clinical trials. But clinical trials are hundreds of millions, literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. So that's that's Death Valley. You can't get across it, in the summertime. Walking on foot with a little canteen, this is too arduous a journey. So it just stays unproven, and the number of items that accumulate on one side of Death Valley is enormous, because almost nothing ever makes it across. And I think what's discouraging is even when you have clinical trials, because there are clinical trials that take place outside the United States or outside the English, countries where English is the dominant language, then it's not accepted. And I think always of the melatonin studies that Paolo Lussoni did in Italy. Italy, yeah. Right, they did all these clinical trials. I visited him, and he was the head of oncology at a huge hospital in Monza, Italy. Large staff.
And he, where are your clinical trials? Well, here are the clinical trials. It never got accepted. Never got accepted.
No,
and some joke,
too cheap.
Too cheap. It's 10 cents or something. So it's cheap. So it only appeals to people who, well, of course, it appeals to patients, but it also, from an economic point of view, it only appeals to people who are trying to economize on cancer treatment rather than profit from cancer treatment. And the profit motive is so strong that it just wipes out any move to make it more economical. That's how I see it.
Right.
And
yeah.
But these drugs like metformin is, you can get that for $4 a month, and I mean, it's a standard drug for diabetes, for oral drug for type 2 diabetes. But is it really doable? Do you find that your patients can stay on it long term?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
It's very tolerable. It has almost no significant side effects. I would say maybe 2% somehow cannot tolerate it because of gastrointestinal issues, or there's some sensitivity. And I'm just overwhelmed. I just wrote a chapter on this, which I think is one of the most, comprehensive on metformin and cancer. It was a big field to review, and it reviewed all the trials for various cancers, pancreas, lung, breast, ovarian. It's efficacious across the board.
Yes.
It's amazing. And as prevention, as treatment, I mean, it works at every level across the board with many different solid tumors. And something as it's like the baby aspirin that everybody should take. Amazing, yeah. But ignored.
Are you familiar with the Care Oncology Clinic approach in London? Yes. So
of course, the Dove Clinic,
Well,
and the Care Oncology.
Yeah, Care Oncology, where they have the 4-drug regimen.
Exactly.
So
that I take issue with that. I mean, one of the 4 drugs is doxycycline, which there have been clinical trials out of Indiana. It doesn't, for it to have meaningful biological, not even clinical, biological effects, the dosage required at 300 milligrams or even 200 milligrams twice a day, most people can't tolerate them.
No.
Even the standard 100 milligrams for acne, people have trouble with tolerating because it causes nausea.
But also, you're destroying the microbiome when you do that, right?
Yeah, that is an issue. And the big issue I have with the Care Oncology approach, and I notice, increasingly, almost a third of my patients who consult me have already consulted with Care Oncology. Everybody, regardless of disease, gets exactly the same recommendation of the same 4 drugs with the same dose.
Right.
So that is not. That's also cafeteria medicine, although it's a different cafeteria.
Yes.
So it doesn't. I think we can do better than that. I mean, it needs to be personalized. We cannot treat every cancer with the same 4 things.
No. And I don't think.
And
you can't do those things indefinitely, because these are still pharmaceutical agents. They're going to have, most of them are going to have side effects, and especially if you have to take it long term. You think that cancers can be starved the way that Jane McClellan talks about in her book?
That is another issue. I think anybody or any one of us, if we only approach this as with a single, to starve it, or just to use immune therapy, etc. It's again falling into the trap of using one approach. It's what I would call the blind man and the elephant syndrome. So you would say, for example, I'm not calling them blind, but I'm just saying.
I understand.
Of course, certain researchers have certain interests in mind. So, for example, Thomas Seyfried likes the idea of using metabolic control of cancer. That metabolism is the key, so we target metabolism, and then again, and then another way is to starve it, of course, through both metabolically and through anti-angiogenesis to block the blood supply.
Yeah.
But again, these are looking. I think the better approach is to really hit it from all different angles. I think cancers have more than just these two aspects.
Yes.
The nutrition and the metabolic supply of nutrition. And in a lot of these drugs like metformin, they don't have just one single mechanism of action. It's pleiotropic.
Yes.
Metformin affects also the immune system. It affects apoptosis. It has many other effects.
Yeah. No matter where you look.
Metabolic. Yeah. So, and a lot of these drugs are like that that we can explore. But anyway, I have a more flexible, more bird's eye view kind of.
So what happens when somebody comes to you as a patient? What sort of tests do you run? And I mean, of course, they come with their records, but what do you need to see? What are you looking for?
I usually don't need a lot of testing because I think some of the testings are unnecessary and it doesn't necessarily give you the right insight. But so most of the standard testing and the standard pathology and nowadays the molecular testing is adequate. And I would add in just, some markers for inflammation, which are pretty simple, C-reactive protein, set rate, homocysteine levels. And then I think, of course, a couple of things that are somewhat underappreciated is the copper level, the ceruloplasmin levels, because copper does play a role, and some vitamin levels like vitamin D, but not
TM to lower the copper if you see that the copper is high?
I used to use a lot of it, and there was a time when for example, Dr. Vedant, who was the head of breast cancer over at she moved. She's now with Sloan Kettering, and she moved out to Connecticut. But she was running a trial using TM. And some of the patients who didn't get into the trial, I would, we will be referred to us to do TM. But it's hard. It's gotten harder and harder to source the drug.
Yes.
The compounding pharmacies don't want to do it because of changes in the rules of rules and regulations.
Now, do you look at the complete blood count, and you look at the strength of the person's immune system? Is that part of your?
Yeah, we do that. Yeah, we do that, but I don't want to overemphasize it because you remember the days, 20, 30 years ago where everybody was so into the NK cells, natural killers. But again, that turned out to be not as promising. I mean, we did try NK therapy, and it's not easy to do. And so the problem is these numbers fluctuate dramatically from sometimes moment to moment. If I told you a good joke and you had a good laugh, your NK cells can go up 3 times. So, and if, very stressed when you're going for the blood because of the blood draw and depressed. So some of these numbers, I don't take them as trustworthy. Solid.
But what about the lymphocytes? If you see that the lymphocytes have been driven down by, let's say, probably by prior chemo or radiation.
Yeah, of course, it's important.
What are you looking for? Do you have an ideal number or some level that you're hoping your patients will get to if you're treating?
Yeah, I mean they need they need absolute lymphocytes at least 1,000, but if it's otherwise everything's low. But lymphocyte subsets are useful. The problem is a lot of like, for example, we do the so-called gamma delta T cell or T lymphocyte treatment. Yeah. The problem is the labs here won't measure it. I called Quest, the labs in New Jersey. So I talked to the chief that was in charge of doing these lymphocytes. They can do lymphocyte subsets. I asked them, I specifically need to know this particular lymphocyte subset, the gamma deltas versus the alpha betas. They said they can do it, but they won't.
Oh, wow.
And the reason is very interesting.
Yeah.
It has to do with billing. There is no code. Everything they build, there has to be a code.
Yeah.
The code they have to apply to the state to get a code. So it says if not enough interest, if
Yes.
Chang's the only person ordering this test, we're
Right.
not going to pay the cost of getting the code, the billing code, just for me and my patients, because how many patients can I send them? So they said, well, we can do it. Technically, the lab can do it, but we're not going to do it because we're not going to get paid.
That's crazy.
The same story. So there's a lot of things.
What do you usually prescribe when you're trying to raise? I had a phone consultee where her absolute number of lymphocytes was 0.05. This woman was walking around with almost no immune system, and I hate to say this, but her oncologist let her out into the world like this and let her just walk around without even telling her that she didn't remember being told they had a problem. What do you do when you're confronted? No, I won't say with that extreme, because that's obviously a very extreme case. But if you've got somebody whose lymphocytes are at, let's say,
I think there are very simple supportive measures. I think Chinese herbs play a very, very useful role in that area. The mushrooms, especially. And other things like astragalus, all the so-called qi boosting. Qi is the Chinese equivalent of immune system. And then the thymic proteins are useful also, the thymic peptides. In Germany, of course, they do injections. Here we do have some products, but again, so
do they get through the
digestive system? Literally the T cell,
Do the thymic, if you take it by mouth, do they get through the digestive system?
It has to be sublingual. You got it, because the peptide is going to be digested away mostly, so they shouldn't swallow it.
Right.
There used to be Douglas Laboratories used to produce a spray, but they stopped doing it because these are derived from animals. Usually from Canada, they may, from beef or sheep in Canada. It's just difficult to, and then, with animal pathogens, etc., and concern for. So I think it got very difficult for them to produce it. Then there are other ones that they stopped making it.
Who makes it now? Who makes it now?
There are. I shouldn't mention brands when they're but. There are a couple. There are a couple. They still make like a powder form that you can just dissolve in the mouth. So there are these sublingual preparations that you can take. So some of the smaller peptides will be absorbed from the oral mucosa.
I see. Well, that's great to know.
That's the best we can do. Otherwise, you end up. Of course. There's the. It's also fascinating. There is the injectable version that's made by a U.S. drug company.
Really?
Cyclone, out in California. They produce an injectable version to treat hepatitis, except that it's only for export. It's made here, but it's not approved here. Or they never submitted for approval here. I mean, the hepatitis market is overseas. So it's available in Asia, Singapore, China. Right. But it's an American company. I think it's in San Mateo, California. It's where it's made.
It's amazing.
So there are injectable thymus drugs made in the U.S. but not for the U.S. market.
Amazing. What about cancer stem cells? Have you explored that or found ways?
Yes, I think, like, for example, that's a good example. That that is not going to be subjected to just metabolic starving, etc. And of course, chemo doesn't work, radiation doesn't work, and it's the cause of, as you know, there's a lot of recurrences. And there's certain items that have been researched and shown, at least in vitro, to be able to destroy stem cells, including metformin. So there are studies on metformin in colon cancer stem cells that it will kill them. The gamma delta T cells, there are immune therapies, I think, can also deal with stem cells. which is why you get cures with immune therapy, and not so much with chemo and radiation.
Right.
Immune therapies.
If they didn't, then you wouldn't have people being cured of late stage melanoma. It has to be anything anything that's going to cure you has to involve the immune system at a certain point.
Yeah.
Because
and the stem cells. Yeah. You'll have to be rid of that. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. So the T cells, etc. Yeah.
What are you excited about in terms of the future of oncology? What do you think? Where do you think things are heading in a positive way?
Yeah. In general, I certainly feel that we are closer than we think to eventually curing the disease. I think it's possible. Maybe in a shorter time than we think. So there are a lot of new things coming on. It's just an explosion of newer things.
Yeah.
Like even the mRNA technology that's made COVID vaccinations so effective.
Yeah.
Is being explored in application for cancer because it may be, again, when they did the COVID vaccine, they didn't know it's going to be. Nobody has used this approach using messenger RNA.
Yeah.
So, it's surprised everybody. It works quite well, and so that approach, can we adopt it for cancer? They're looking at it. I mean, the same companies that are doing the vaccine, they're looking at it. So I think that's all very promising. It would be in the same direction as the immune therapies, and I think epigenetic treatments would be ultimately very useful in controlling recurrences at the genome, because that's the cause, that's the root cause. It's genetic controls and programming that's the root cause of this problem. Immune system can only deal with the after. I mean, it's already there, then the immune system is cause. But how do you stop it at the fundamental level?
Right.
So I think epigenetic treatments are very promising. What I'm worried about is the trend for the cost of these things. The newer treatments, it's become ridiculous. What are people going to do in the third world? $10,000-$15,000 per treatment.
Well, what about $150,000 for Opdivo and Keytruda per patient?
Oh,
$150,000.
And you know what the proposed price point for the CAR T treatment?
$475,000.
Yeah. What are we? Yeah, for one treatment.
I mean, there are countries that don't have a gross national product that high.
Yeah, I mean, the government will need to be sending out more relief checks to people with cancer.
Pretty big ones at that.
Yeah, half $500,000.
Right. Yeah.
So that is very worrisome because that leads also to the increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots. Well, what if you're in India with cancer? You should just go home because there's nothing.
Right.
It's nothing affordable.
I know. I mean,
and all the cheap ones they don't include in the NCCN. Only the expensive ones go into the protocols.
And it's not going to happen in it becomes this elite Western thing. I guess Eastern thing too. But I remember I lectured in Xi'an, China. Yeah. And what I started to talk about targeted therapies. That was before the immune checkpoint drugs came along. And somebody raised their hand and said, listen, you can skip this part of the lecture because this is completely irrelevant for us. We cannot afford as a country to use these medicines. Move on to the next thing because it's just ridiculous. And the whole thing is, I wrote a book about this, Cancer Incorporated, but it seems like they price themselves out of the market. But on the other hand, as long as the government is willing to pay for it through Medicare and through, then they bring along the other insurance companies, the public doesn't rise up.
They don't notice it. Yeah. They don't look at the bills. Yeah.
Correct. They don't have to pay the bill. Yeah. But there must be, so many other ways of influencing the growth of cancer than just to go down this road where, as we were just saying, with the CAR T cell coming up at $475,000 per patient for one infusion. Come on. And we know from Carl June gave the game away because he said that it only costs them $20,000 to produce the injection. So it's, the math is what? It's like a couple of percentage points of what they're actually wind up charging, which is $20,000 to make a drug is still a fortune, but how do you get from $20,000 to $475,000? That's like
because they don't account for, they don't price things based on cost. They price it based on the market.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like
whatever it's worth. How much is a life worth if it's a cure?
It's just like you're buying a luxury car.
That's how,
something
right.
Like that.
So they'll price it according to that. I mean, if it's worth that much to you, then it's going to be that much.
That's not a good way.
Well, these are the MBAs who are involved with, maximal profits. I mean, it's capitalism amok, basically.
Right, absolutely.
In the pharmaceutical area,
It sure is. Well, thank you so much, Ray. It's really great talking to you again. I'm so glad that we did this. And
such a pleasure to connect.
Let's do it again sometime soon.
Sure.
Okay, well,
wonderful.
For more support, this is Ralph Boss.
Thank you for listening to The Moss Report. Visit our website at themossreport.com and subscribe to hear more discussion of cancer treatment options, alternative research, and more. For more information about Dr. Moss and his work, including scheduling phone consultations, go to mossreports.com.